The lobby of Grant Innovations sounded different from the woods. Their sound was a soft, layered thing. Wind in the trees, the creak of branches, the rustle of small animals moving through underbrush. Here, it was sharper, brighter. Heels on polished floors, the low hum of conversation, the quiet chime of an elevator arriving. Jack stood just inside the glass doors, visitor badge clipped crookedly to his shirt, one hand resting in the pocket of his coat as if that might keep him grounded. A receptionist with perfect posture had greeted him with a bright smile and a "Welcome, Mr. Turner," as if people like him walked in every day. He doubted they did. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "You've been in worse rooms than this." He had, but those rooms had come with a different kind of danger, one he understood. This one carried the quieter terror of not belonging. Then the elevator doors slid open, and there was Lisa. She didn't walk toward him the way she moved through conference halls. No carefully measured steps, no show of authority. She moved quickly, almost lightly, hand lifting in an unguarded wave. "I said I would," he replied. "You really came," she said, and there was no hiding the relief in her voice. "People say a lot of things to me," she answered. "Showing up is rarer than you'd think." She took him through a brief whirlwind that she promised was orientation, though to Jack it felt a bit like being dropped into a maze of glass walls and soft carpet. She introduced him to security staff, two younger guards who straightened when they shook his hand, as if realizing they were standing next to the kind of man their grandfathers might tell stories about. "This is Jack Turner," she told them. "He'll be helping us rethink how we keep this place safe, inside and out." The younger of the two opened his mouth, then apparently thought better of whatever he'd been about to say. "It's an honor, sir," he settled on instead. "Jack is fine," Jack replied. "Sir makes me look for someone behind me." They gave him a tablet, sleek and thin, and showed him how to log into the internal system. He managed the password on the second try, muttering something about fat fingers and small keyboards. When a notification pinged, he almost flinched. "You'll get used to it," Lisa said. "Yeah? The noise? It's a different kind than what you're used to." "I'm not sure that's comforting," he answered dryly, and she smiled. In the days that followed, Jack learned the strange rhythm of office life. He learned that people here said "circle back" when they meant, "We have no idea yet," and "let's table that" when they meant "not now, maybe never." He attended meetings where diagrams were projected on walls, lines, and boxes describing how information would travel through invisible systems. At first, he stayed quiet, hands folded, listening. When he did speak, it was usually to break the room's momentum with a simple question. "And what happens," he'd ask, "to the guy who doesn't have good Wi-Fi, whose hands shake too much to tap these little buttons? Who's not sure he wants to be reminded every day that he's not sleeping?" The room would go silent for a moment. Then the lead engineer would clear her throat and say, "That's a good point," and notes would be taken, and somewhere in the code, a new feature would begin to take shape. A simplified mode, a voice option, a way to hand the phone to a spouse or friend who could help. He still felt like a foreigner most of the time. He called the shared break room the chow hall once, and 3 people laughed, not unkindly. He addressed 2 interns as ma'am and sir, and they flushed and told him he really didn't have to do that. But no one mocked him. No one treated him like a relic. If anything, people seemed to straighten when he walked by, not out of fear or obligation, but out of a quiet respect he didn't quite know what to do with. On the 3rd day, as he sat in the small security office reviewing camera placements and emergency procedures, there was a knock on the open door. He looked up to see Emma standing there, clutching a paper bag decorated with heart stickers. Lisa hovered behind her, a little out of breath. "We had a doctor's appointment across town," she explained. "Someone was very insistent that we stop by Uncle Bear's new job. I hope that's okay." "Depends," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "Did she bring bribes?" Emma stepped forward, solemn as a diplomat. "I brought you something so you don't forget," she said, pushing the bag into his hands. Jack opened it carefully. Inside was a stretchy blue rubber bracelet, the kind kids traded at school. White block letters marched around it in slightly crooked printing. "Best hero ever." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. He had been given medals before. Ribbons, certificates with gold seals and signatures that didn't know his face. Those had gone into a box in the back of a closet long ago. This was different. "Did you make this?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Emma nodded, curls bouncing. "I picked the color," she said. "Blue is brave. That's what Mom says. So when you're here and we're not, you remember you're brave, okay?" He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. It looked almost comical against his scarred, weathered hand. a bright band of child's plastic on a man who'd carried much heavier things. He closed his fingers around it for a second, feeling its slight give. "I won't forget," he said. Lisa watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely, something like gratitude and worry mixed together on her face. She had seen him at his most composed, standing in front of cameras to defend her when the world turned cruel. She had seen him at her kitchen sink, drying dishes like he'd always belonged there. But this, the sight of him staring at a simple bracelet as if it were a compass, told her something deeper. He was not just helping her company, he was letting himself believe, inch by inch, that he could still move forward. That night, back at the cabin, Jack set his keys on the table, hung his coat on the same old hook, and sat down heavily in his usual chair. Ranger settled at his feet, head resting on his boot. The house was as quiet as ever. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, the clock ticked its patient rhythm. Jack lifted his left hand, turning it in the lamplight. The blue band caught the glow and held it. "Best hero ever," he read under his breath, almost incredulous. He huffed out something that might have been a laugh, might have been a sigh. "I don't know about that, kid," he murmured, scratching Ranger's ears. "But I'm trying." The dog shifted closer, pressing his weight against Jack's leg, as if in agreement. And for the first time in a very long time, as the night settled around the little cabin in the woods, Jack Turner felt not just like a man who had survived, but like a man who might still have something left to give. By late winter, Jack's days had settled into a rhythm that felt almost suspiciously gentle. Morning still belonged to the woods. He split logs behind the cabin, breath puffing in small clouds, listening to the clean sound of the axe biting into the grain. He walked the trails with Ranger, boots crunching through old snow, letting the quiet do what it had always done, wash the noise out of his head. But evenings had started to belong to something else. Sometimes, it was the soft slam of a car door in his driveway just before dusk. Emma's voice drifting through the trees before he even saw her. "Uncle Bear, Ranger, we're here." She barreled up the path, boots kicking up powder, talking before the door was halfway open. Ranger met her with his usual measured enthusiasm, tail wagging, nose examining her pockets for possible treats. Lisa followed at a slower pace, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms loaded with grocery bags or takeout containers. "I brought dinner," she would say, almost apologetic, or at least a reasonable attempt. Other nights, it was Jack who got in his truck after work and drove into town, turning left instead of right at the main intersection. He'd park outside the rental house where the porch light always seemed to be on before he arrived, as if someone inside had been watching for his headlights. Inside those walls, a new kind of ordinary had taken shape. Emma sprawled on the living room rug, building elaborate forts out of pillows and blankets, assigning everyone roles in the adventure. Ranger was always the guard dog. Lisa was alternately the queen, the scientist, or the one who needed rescuing. Jack, to his mild horror, was sometimes cast as the dragon who becomes nice later. He read stories in a voice softened by years and miles, stumbling over the silly rhymes but nailing the quiet parts. He learned which songs made Emma's eyes drift shut and which ones made her wide awake again. He fixed leaky faucets, tightened loose cabinet doors, adjusted the thermostat that clicked off at the wrong times. He never made a big deal out of any of it. He just did what needed doing the way he always had. And Lisa watched. She watched the way Emma's small body relaxed completely when she was leaning against his side. She watched how Ranger followed Emma from room to room, but never relaxed fully unless Jack was somewhere within reach. She watched Jack's shoulders drop half an inch when he walked through her door, as if some invisible weight at the base of his neck had gotten just a little lighter. She also watched her work change. The new project, the platform for veterans, grew quickly. At first, it had been a pitch deck and a few whiteboard sketches. Now, designs covered an entire wall in one of the glass conference rooms. There were early prototypes running on test devices, little circles pulsing on screens like tentative heartbeats. Jack's fingerprints were all over the thing, even in places he didn't realize. He had mentioned, in an offhand way, how hard it was for guys he knew to find a therapist who actually understood the kind of nightmares that didn't wake you up screaming, but left you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, numb. 2 weeks later, there was a quiet directory function added, one that let users filter for counselors with military experience, trauma training, or lived family experience. He had said, while stirring sugar into his coffee, that some nights what kept a man from falling apart wasn't a doctor, but a buddy who simply answered the phone and stayed on the line, saying nothing. A week later, the engineers were sketching out a call a friend feature. Something simple. One button connecting someone to the person they trusted most. No explanation required. "It was your idea," Lisa told him one afternoon, standing beside the wall of diagrams. "I just talked," he said. "You're the ones building magic tricks out of it." "It's not magic," she answered. "It's a ladder. For people who are tired of climbing out of the dark alone." He didn't argue. But later, sitting at his kitchen table with the prototype in his hand, he traced the edges of the screen the way he'd once traced the edges of a dog-eared photo, and wondered who he might have been if something like this had existed 15 years ago. The more he let himself care about the project, the more he found himself caring about the person driving it. He saw how late Lisa stayed at the office, reviewing reports with tired eyes and a pen in her hand. He noticed the way she perked up when a veteran tester sent an email saying, "For the first time in years, I feel like someone built something with me in mind, not just my diagnosis." He caught the moments when she thought no one was looking, fingers pinching the bridge of her nose, shoulders hunched, the weight of responsibility pressing down. "You need sleep," he told her once, finding her still awake at midnight on the couch after Emma had long since drifted off. Her laptop glowed on her knees, casting a pale light on the lines of strain around her mouth. "Sleep is for people who aren't behind on a launch," she said weakly. "Or for people who didn't almost lose their entire lives in a house fire." He sat down beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "You don't have to pay the universe back by never resting," he said. "You already did the impossible. You kept going." "Some days," she admitted, voice cracking, "I'm not sure if I'm building something helpful or if I'm just trying to prove to myself that the fire didn't win." "Maybe it can be both," he said. "Maybe that's okay." She didn't answer, but she closed the laptop and let her head rest back against the couch cushion, eyes closed. For a while, it felt like they were all moving in the same direction. Jack healing in slow, quiet ways he almost didn't notice. Lisa weaving her fierce, relentless energy into something that might outlive her. Emma growing up in a world where the words Uncle Bear and Ranger were as solid to her as home. Then, as winter began to lean toward spring, the first crack appeared. It started with a link in Lisa's inbox, sent by someone on the communications team with the subject line, "You should see this." She clicked it between meetings, half distracted, thinking it would be another small blog post praising the company's innovation or speculating about their new product. At first, that's what it seemed like, until the words twisted. CEO uses veteran friend as marketing stunt, exploiting trauma for profit? Is this empowerment or manipulation? Lisa stared at the screen, the color draining from her face. There, below the headline, was a blurry photo someone had taken at the community center months earlier. Jack standing stiffly in front of a small cluster of local reporters. Her name pulled out in bold, the story bent into a shape she didn't recognize. On the surface, it was just an article on a fringe site, the kind most people scrolled past. But Lisa had been in this world long enough to know. Sometimes, all it took was one spark in the wrong place to start a different kind of fire. The first article should have been nothing. Lisa told herself that as she closed the browser tab, jaw clenched. Fringe blog. No standards, no real reach. Except by that afternoon, 3 people had forwarded it, just so you're aware. By the next morning, there were 3 more. The headlines changed, but the angle stayed the same. Tech CEO exploits veterans' trauma to sell new app. Hero soldier or carefully crafted brand asset? Is Grant's healing platform just another way to cash in on pain? Someone had clipped a piece of Jack's public statement from months ago, the one he'd made outside the community center when he'd defended her after the fire, and spliced it next to photos of Lisa on stage at a conference, smiling in a crisp blazer. The captions did the rest, suggesting scripts and manipulation where there had only been a man speaking from his own battered heart. The comments were worse. Rich people always find a way to use somebody. Watch, she'll be on a magazine cover with that guy in no time. Feels gross. Hope the vet is actually okay with all this. Lisa closed her office door and sat at her desk, fingers pressed to her temples. Outside, through the tinted glass, she could see the rest of the floor humming along. Engineers bent over laptops, designers pinning mock-ups, assistants carrying coffee. Inside, the quiet felt like it might swallow her. Her PR director came in with a tablet and a carefully neutral tone. "We're monitoring the coverage," she said. "It's mostly small outlets. Social is starting to pick it up, though. We can put out a statement clarifying the relationship. Or we can ignore it and hope it burns itself out." "Clarifying what?" Lisa asked dully. That my daughter nearly died, that a man ran into a fire for her, and now we're trying to build something good out of the wreckage? That doesn't exactly fit in a tweet. We can talk about the advisory board, the PR director offered. Emphasize that Jack is compensated fairly, that he's not just a prop. The word prop landed like a stone. Lisa looked up sharply. He's not a prop at all, she said. He's a person. He's the reason any of this exists in the first place. The director softened. I know that, she said gently. The internet doesn't. Over the next week, the fire spread. A bigger site picked up the story, painting it as a cautionary tale about ethical boundaries in tech. A podcast host with a large following did a segment asking whether turning trauma into product was ever acceptable, even if the intentions were good. They mispronounced Emma's name, but her photo still flashed on the screen. Investors started calling, their voices all sounding the same, tight, careful, full of concerns and questions about optics. The board requested an emergency meeting. It was held over video, faces in neat little squares, some of them thousands of miles away. They praised her vision and track record, then slid inexorably toward talk of risk, reputation management, and timing the launch more strategically. Maybe, one of them ventured. We press pause on the veteran platform, at least publicly. Work on something less charged. We can't afford to attach the company's future to a controversial narrative right now. Lisa listened, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her nails dug crescents into her palms. This isn't a narrative, she said quietly when they paused. It's people's lives. We're not packaging someone's pain for a marketing campaign. We're giving them tools they've never had. Of course, another board member soothed. No one is questioning your heart, Lisa. We're talking about perception. Perception can kill a good idea before it ever has a chance. By the time the call ended, the launch was postponed indefinitely. Officially, it was to reassess market conditions. Unofficially, it was because strangers on the internet had decided she was a villain. That night, she did not go to the office late. She didn't open her laptop in the living room. She sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands while Emma colored at the other end, humming to herself. When Jack knocked on the door, she didn't move at first. Ranger's bark, two short, familiar woofs, announced him long before his shadow filled the doorway. Hey, he said softly, stepping into the light. Your porch light was on. Figured that meant it was safe to come in. She lifted her head. He saw the redness around her eyes, the tight set of her shoulders, the way her normally steady hands trembled just a little. Did you see it? She asked. Any of it? Some, he admitted. He'd seen more than he let on. He'd watched a commentator on TV talk about the veteran like he was an abstract concept, not a man who still woke some nights with his heart hammering. Sure, he smelled smoke again. They're saying I used you, Lisa whispered, that I dragged you into the spotlight to make myself look generous, that I'm exploiting your story to sell software. Is any of that true? He asked. She looked at him, stung. No, God, no. I didn't even want you to speak publicly that first time. You just... Then it's a lie, he said, and lies only get power if you let them. She laughed weakly, the sound closer to a sob. That's not how it works, Jack. Not in my world. If enough people repeat a lie, it becomes the only thing anyone hears. Investors don't care about context. They care about headlines that make their stock twitch. He didn't offer business advice. That wasn't his terrain. Instead, he walked around the table and sat beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he reached over and took one of her clenched hands in his own, gently prying her fingers away from her palm. Her breath hitched. I just wanted to help, she said, voice cracking on the last word. After the fire, after everything, I thought if we built this right, it could matter. That it might mean your friend's death wasn't just another name on a folded flag. Now they say I'm a fraud. That I'm playing hero with someone else's scars. He didn't tell her she was wrong to be hurt. He didn't tell her to calm down or to ignore it or that these things blow over. Instead, he did the one thing that had always made sense to him when the world tilted. He stayed. He sat there while Emma eventually wandered over, climbed into Lisa's lap, and wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck. He sat there as Ranger lay quietly at their feet, a warm weight of presence. He sat there until the tears slowed and Lisa's breathing evened out, her cheek resting against her daughter's hair. The next morning, he was gone before she woke up. She found out what he'd done over coffee, the TV murmuring in the background more out of habit than attention. A local news station had cut in with a live feed from the town square where a small crowd had gathered. The caption read, "Veteran speaks out about controversial tech CEO." Lisa almost turned it off. Then she saw him. Jack stood on the makeshift platform in front of the old community center, wearing his worn coat and a clean shirt, the blue bracelet Emma had given him bright against his wrist. There was no podium, no PR team, no prepared statement, just a couple of handheld mics and a reporter who looked slightly surprised to find herself there. "I was a soldier," Jack was saying, voice carrying clearly despite the winter air. "I lost someone who saved my life. Came home with a chest full of ghosts and a head full of noise. For a long time, I didn't much care what happened next." He paused, eyes scanning the small crowd, not for effect, but as if he were checking to make sure they were really there. "Then I met Lisa Grant," he continued. "She didn't ask for my story. She didn't drag it out of me. She listened. She didn't offer easy answers. She gave me a reason to start walking forward again when I'd made a home out of standing still." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a dog tag, the metal dull from years against his skin. On the TV screen, the camera zoomed in slightly. "I wore this for 15 years, he said. "To remember my friend, to remember what I lost. I took it off the day I realized I didn't have to live only in the past anymore. She was a big reason why." He held the tag out to the nearest reporter, who took it, looking startled. "You can run whatever story you want," Jack said. "You can question motives, spin headlines. But if you're going to use my name, use this truth too. I'm not being used. I chose to stand by her. I choose it still." The feed cut briefly to the news anchor, clearly trying to decide whether to treat the moment as a human interest story or something bigger. Out in her small kitchen, Lisa sat frozen, coffee cooling in her hands. The man who hated cameras had gone and stood in front of one. For her, outside the window, the sky remained the same flat winter gray. But inside her chest, something ignited. A small, steady flame that had nothing to do with anger or fear. It was something closer to awe. The internet, for once, did something unexpected. The clip of Jack speaking outside the community center wasn't supposed to matter much. It was local news, a short segment tucked between weather updates and a piece about holiday donations at the animal shelter. But someone clipped it, posted it with a simple caption, "Listen to this man," and let it go. From there, it traveled. Veterans groups shared it first. A wife in Ohio tagged her husband and wrote, "Sounds like you." A former medic in Texas commented, "This is what it looks like when someone stands up for you without asking for anything back." The clip made its way into private Facebook groups and email chains named things like "Old Unit Still Kicking." Then others picked it up. Not the gossip sites this time, but people who knew what it meant to be misunderstood in public. A nurse who'd burned out in COVID wards. A teacher worn thin by years of budget cuts. A firefighter who wrote, "Sometimes the heroes we talk about are the ones who never wanted the word near them." The narrative shifted, not with a sudden explosion, but like a tide turning. Articles began to appear with different headlines. "Veteran defends tech CEO amid backlash. I chose to stand by her." Behind the viral clip, a quiet partnership aimed at healing invisible wounds. Grant Innovation's inbox filled again, but now with messages that sounded different. "If this app ever launches, my son will be first in line. My husband hasn't left the house much in 3 years. If this is real, we'll try it. Thank you for building something for people like us." Investors, sensing the wind change, started calling back. Their tones were smoother this time, full of phrases like, "We may have reacted prematurely," and "Perhaps there's an opportunity to lean into authenticity." The board, never eager to admit missteps, began to talk about reframing the rollout and capitalizing on organic support. Lisa listened to all of it with a stretched, weary sort of detachment. She nodded in the right places, thanked people for their renewed confidence, scheduled new launch dates. But in the quiet of her car, after yet another call, hands still on the steering wheel, forehead resting against the leather, she understood something clearly. The numbers mattered, the headlines mattered, the product mattered. But what mattered most happened before any of that shifted. A man who hated cameras had stood in front of one and handed over his dog tag as proof. That evening, when the sun slid low and painted the edges of the snow a faint lavender, Lisa drove out to the cabin. She didn't call first. She didn't rehearse what she would say. She just followed the narrow road until the trees closed in and the familiar smoke from Jack's chimney appeared between the branches. Ranger met her at the bottom of the steps, tail swishing once, then twice. When the door opened, Jack stood there in his usual flannel, eyes tired but steady. "I saw it," she said. "Say?" Voice already fraying at the edges. "The clip, the way you spoke, the comments. I saw that you gave them your tag." He shrugged, uncomfortable under direct praise. "Seemed like the easiest way to tell them I meant it," he said. "They like symbols, media folks. Figured that one was mine to give." "You didn't have to save me," she whispered. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossing loosely over his chest. "I didn't do it because I had to." "Then why?" she asked. It came out more desperate than she intended, but she didn't pull it back. He held her gaze for a long breath. The air between them felt thinner somehow. The weight of winter and headlines and shared history all pressing in. "Because you matter," he said finally. There was no flourish in the words, no attempt at poetry, just truth, plain and heavy. "And if the world couldn't see your heart, I thought maybe I could point them in the right direction." Her lips trembled. She swallowed hard, eyes glittering dangerously. Before she could respond, a blur of pink barreled out of the cab of the truck parked in the drive. "Daddy Bear!" Emma crashed into Jack's legs with all the force her small body could muster, arms wrapping around him in a fierce hug. The new name landed in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Small, but sending ripples in every direction. Jack froze. For a second, every muscle seemed to lock. Ranger shifted, sensing the change, ears flicking in concern. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Daddy Bear. Not uncle, not hero, not the careful titles adults choose when they're afraid to name what's growing. Jack looked down slowly. Emma stared up at him, oblivious to the earthquake she'd just sparked. "Is it okay I called you that?" she asked, suddenly unsure. "Because you feel like a dad, but also like a bear, and—" He sank to one knee before she could finish, arms sliding around her. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It's okay." He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, pressing his chin gently to the top of her head. It wasn't the uniformed hug he'd given fellow Marines at funeral receptions, stiff and restrained. It was something softer, deeper, like a door quietly opening in a house that had been closed for a long time. Behind them, Lisa stood on the path, hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching with a look that was equal parts wonder and fear. He didn't need medals. He didn't need another article, another headline, another crowd. Standing there with Emma in his arms, the cabin at his back, and Lisa watching from just a few feet away, Jack realized something simple and enormous. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing in the ruins of his life. He felt like he was standing at the threshold of one. The invitation came on a Thursday that smelled like thawing snow and tired coffee. Lisa called him from the office, her voice softer than usual, stripped of the brisk efficiency she used in meetings. "We're not celebrating anything," she said. "No launch, no milestone. I'm making dinner, for us. If you're not sick of the sight of us yet, I'd like you to come." Jack glanced at the security monitors, then at the blue bracelet around his wrist. The office hummed behind him, a world of tasks and deadlines and polished phrases. On the screen, one camera showed the empty lobby. On another, the reflection of his own face looked back at him, older than he sometimes felt inside. "I'll be there at 6, he said. Her exhale carried through the line, a tiny, grateful sound. "We'll keep a plate warm." That evening, when he stepped into the house, it smelled like garlic and something slightly on the edge of burning. The living room lights were dimmer than usual, the kind of glow that made everything look softer around the edges. Emma answered the door wearing a paper crown askew on her head, cheeks dusted with flour. Daddy Bear," she corrected herself with great seriousness. "Mom says dinner is edible-ish. But I did the decorations, so those are perfect." Jack looked past her into the dining room and nearly laughed. The table was covered with a plain white cloth, scattered with hand-drawn place cards. Each one had a stick figure and a label. Mom, Daddy Bear, EMA, and a fourth one taped to the chair nearest the door that read Ranger in careful capitals. An army of tea lights in mismatched holders marched down the center, some already leaning dangerously in their melted wax. From the kitchen, Lisa appeared, apron crooked, a wooden spoon in her hand. "Before you say anything," she warned, "I want it on record that the smoke alarm only went off once, and that was a Pan's fault, not mine." He smiled, the expression easier now than it used to be. "I've eaten worse. Military cafeterias are where culinary hope goes to die." They sat down to a meal that was, as advertised, edible-ish. The pasta was a little overcooked, the sauce a bit too salty, the garlic bread tipping toward the charred side of Toasty. But the laughter was real, and the way Emma proudly announced every dish as if presenting a royal feast made it taste better. At one point, as Emma reached for her glass of water, her elbow bumped it. The cup tipped, sending a rush of water across the table, soaking a place card and one of the flickering candles. Lisa flinched. It was a small, instinctive jerk, shoulders tensing, eyes darting to the mess with a kind of braced dread. Years of living in high-stakes spaces had trained her to expect that missteps would always be punished. Before she could leap up, apologies already assembling on her tongue, Jack reached out and laid a hand gently over hers. "Hey," he said quietly, "it's just water." Her breath caught. The room seemed to narrow to the feel of his calloused palm resting on her knuckles. "You don't have to fix everything," he added. "Not tonight. Here, we're allowed to just mop it up and keep going." Emma grabbed a dish towel and started blotting the spill with the solemn focus of a surgeon. Ranger, ever hopeful, sniffed the damp spot and looked mildly disappointed it wasn't food. Lisa looked at their joined hands, the spreading, harmless puddle, her daughter's determined face. Then she let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest since before the fire. She smiled. Not the polished, practiced curve she wore in front of cameras, but something smaller and truer. After dinner, Emma built a blanket fort in the living room, complete with a no grown-ups allowed unless invited rule. Ranger and Jack both received invitations. Lisa was eventually granted a special exception, because somebody has to bring the snacks. Later, when the movie credits rolled and Emma fell asleep with her head on Ranger's side and one small foot draped over Jack's leg, they carried her to bed in the familiar wordless choreography they'd developed without realizing it. Outside, the air was clear and cold, the stars sharp in the ink-blue sky. Jack stood in the open doorway, coat on, boots laced, reluctant to step back into the dark. "I should go," he said. He said. "Early start tomorrow." Lisa nodded, leaning against the frame. The porch light painted a halo on the snow-dusted steps. "Wait," he said suddenly, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a battered notebook, its corners soft from being carried across countries and years. Carefully, he unfolded a single page, the paper creased and worn. "A friend of mine wrote this," he said. "Over there, the one who didn't make it back. I've carried it for a long time. Feels like I was just holding it for someone else." Lisa took the page gently, eyes scanning the rough handwriting at the top. "If you ever meet a woman who makes you want to live one more day," it read, "don't let her go." Her eyes blurred halfway through the sentence. She blinked hard once, then again. Jack watched her, his face more open than she'd ever seen it, all the usual defenses lowered. "I think I found her," he said quietly. The night seemed to hold its breath. Lisa folded the page with care, as if it were something holy, and pressed it against her chest. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't the tentative, careful hug of people testing the waters. It was the embrace of two souls who had circled the same ache from different directions and finally found each other in the middle. He held her. Not like she might break, but like she had already broken once and healed in new, stronger lines. She held him, not to keep him from leaving, but to let him know he didn't have to run anymore. Inside, a small voice murmured in sleep, barely audible through the slightly open window. "Night, Daddy Bear." Emma whispered to the dark, unaware that he was still there, her words floating out into the cold air like a blessing. On the porch, under the soft buzz of the light and the quiet witness of the winter sky, two people scarred by fire and time stood with their arms around each other and did something braver than running into a burning house. They let themselves believe in a future. Summer in New Hampshire arrived like an apology. The same trees that had stood bare and black against winter skies now bent under the weight of new leaves. The air smelled of cut grass and wildflowers instead of wood smoke. The meadow near the edge of town, once a simple stretch of field, had been transformed for the day. White chairs formed two soft rows, facing a small wooden arch draped with greenery and pale ribbons. The sky was a forgiving blue, the kind that looked like it might hold. Emma ran between the chairs, a blur of soft pink and curls, clutching a bouquet of daisies and forget-me-nots. She stopped every few steps to greet someone, an engineer from the office, a neighbor from the cul-de-sac, a retired sergeant in a clean but well-worn suit. "You have to sit down soon," she informed one cluster of guests, "because we're doing a very serious thing, and I am in charge of petals." Near the arch, Lisa stood with her hands wrapped around a small bunch of flowers. Long white dress, simple and unadorned. Her hair was swept up, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She wasn't the version of herself people were used to seeing on magazine covers. There was no sharp blazer, no microphone clipped to her collar. She looked, Jack thought, as he waited at the edge of the meadow, like someone who had finally put down something heavy. The music changed. Every head turned as Ranger trotted up the aisle, steps measured, chest out. Around his neck, a satin ribbon held two simple gold rings that caught the sunlight as he moved. When he reached the front, he sat beside Lisa without prompting, as if understanding exactly what today was. Then Jack stepped into the clearing. He wore a dark gray suit, the first he'd owned in over a decade. It didn't quite sit like a uniform, but it felt right in a different way. His shoulders, once hunched under the weight of things unsaid, were straighter now. The lines around his eyes were still there, but they were written by laughter as often as by pain these days. As he walked up the makeshift aisle, faces turned toward him, some that had known him only as that veteran from the news, others who knew him as the man who came to fix their fence, to sit quietly with them at the support group, to show their kids how to whistle for a dog. At the arch stood an older man in a well-kept dress uniform. Colonel Harris had once commanded Jack's unit, his voice the one that had sent them into danger and brought them home when he could. Today, his hands shook just a little as he opened the worn leather book that held the ceremony words. "When I first met Sergeant Jack Turner," he began, "he was a young Marine with too much silence in his eyes. One day he told me, 'Sir, I'm not sure I remember how to love anything that isn't a mission.'" A ripple of soft laughter moved through the chairs. Jack felt his ears warm. The colonel looked between Jack and Lisa, his eyes unexpectedly bright. "Today," he said, voice thickening slightly, "I have my answer." He stepped aside. Emma, suddenly serious, marched forward. In her hands, she held a sheet of paper covered in crayon hearts and wobbly stars. She cleared her throat, glancing at both of them. "These are my wishes," she announced. "Number 1, I wish Daddy Bear takes me to school every day when I'm big enough. Number 2, I wish Mommy laughs every day. Number 3, I wish we are a family forever, even when I'm old and my hair is weird." Laughter broke, gentle and wet-eyed. Lisa sank to her knees, pulling Emma into an embrace, tears spilling freely now. Jack knelt beside them, pressing a kiss to Emma's forehead, then to Lisa's. When he slid the ring onto Lisa's finger, his hands trembled, but his voice did not. "You are my home," he said simply. "Not the walls, not the roof. You." She slid his ring on in turn, fingers tracing the scars on his knuckles with reverence rather than pity. "Wherever you are," she replied, "that's where the light is." Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and rose, the scene shifted. The old cabin at the edge of the woods didn't look quite the same anymore. The rough exterior had been mended, not into something shiny and new, but into something sturdy and welcoming. A carved wooden sign hung over the doorway now, letters carefully etched by someone with more patience than training. Veteran Healing Center. Inside, the main room was bright and lived in. Mismatched chairs and sofas formed small circles. A coffee pot burbled on a side table. The walls were covered in children's drawings and photographs. Dogs, trees, people standing together, faces turned toward the camera with shy, surprised smiles. A group of men and women sat in a loose circle near the window. Some wore service caps, others plain flannel shirts or hoodies. They talked quietly, sometimes haltingly, about nights when sleep felt dangerous, about days when getting out of bed felt like more than they could manage. Jack sat among them, hands loose on his knees, Ranger stretched at his feet wearing a vest that read "Therapy Dog" in neat lettering. He didn't lead every conversation. Sometimes he just listened, offering a nod or a small, steady comment that kept the thread from breaking. Lisa moved between rooms, clipboard in hand, but her face light, her laugh easy. She checked in with the young therapist running a breathing workshop in what had once been Jack's small bedroom. She adjusted a donation box near the door, tucking a handwritten note beside it. No one turned away. Ever. Out back, Emma pumped her legs on a wooden swing hung from an old maple tree. Her squeals of delight carried across the yard as Jack gave her gentle pushes. "Higher, Daddy Bear," she shouted. "I want to see the tops of the trees." "You see too much, you'll start giving me orders," he called back. "And I already take enough of those from your mother." Ranger lay in the grass between them and the house, eyes half closed, ears twitching at each sound. He was older now. The white around his muzzle had spread, but his posture still said clearly, I'm on duty. On the porch, Lisa sat with a paperback in her lap, the pages forgotten as she watched her family framed against the late afternoon light. The lines of worry that had once bracketed her mouth had softened. The fire hadn't vanished from her. It had just been given somewhere kinder to burn. As the sun slipped toward the horizon, the light wrapped itself around them all. The swinging child, the watchful dog, the man who had once been nothing but wounds and duty, the woman who had turned her grief into a promise. There had been a time when Jack believed the fire that nearly took Emma had destroyed the last good thing that might have happened to him. Now, watching Emma's hair streaming behind her like a banner, hearing Lisa's quiet laugh drift across the yard, feeling the solid warmth of Ranger at his heel, he understood something else. The fire hadn't just taken, it had cleared the old dead parts of him that refused to move, cleared the paths he'd been too stubborn to try, cleared a space where something unexpected and beautiful could grow. Love, yes, but also purpose, and the kind of peace that didn't erase the past, only wove it into a gentler pattern. Somewhere, a narrator's voice, the kind you might hear late at night when the house is quiet and sleep feels far away, seemed to speak softly over the scene. Sometimes the flames we fear most don't come to end us. They come to show us what can survive. They reveal the quiet heroes, the ones who run toward the cry in the dark, who stand beside us when the world misjudges, who fix the flickering lights and stay for the hard conversations. They remind us that even after everything is broken, we can still choose to build something kinder in its place. If you're listening to this with your eyes half closed, feeling the day finally loosen its grip, maybe you know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. And if the world has ever made you feel used up, or misunderstood, or left behind, remember this: there is still time for your story to turn toward the light. Out in the yard, the swing slowed, the laughter softened, and evening settled like a blanket over the trees. Inside, a blue bracelet rested on a hook by the door, its simple words worn but legible. Best hero ever. Not because he ran into a burning house once, but because, when given the chance, he kept choosing to stay.